Fantastic. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Um, Hope you're having a great day and you're not trudging through too much snow. A little bit of a reprieve today for kind of a wintry mix, but yeah, super glad to have you all here. If I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, my name's Maddie. I work here at the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. I have the great privilege of being kind of a moderator slash host slash navigator of the PowerPoint today. I have my colleague Hannah who's going to be checking out our chat. We really are wanting this to be an interactive um, session for you. So hopefully we can keep your attention over the course of the next hour. We put on these workforce webinars every month. We mix up the topics. This is a really great opportunity for us on the workforce team here, as well as our advocacy team, to just kind of put our heads together and think through what are some topics we're hearing from members that you're interested in, whether it's a piece of legislation that is being looked at the Capitol or something happening with workforce or kind of a combination of the two. And yeah, just putting together a short lunch program for you, utilizing some of our great members and other community members across the Twin Cities, kind of as that armchair idea person, that local expert, that kind of boots on the ground perspective, maybe having experience with the topic or running programs that seem to be really aligned with the type of maybe issue that we're dealing with. So that is why we're here. Um, Super excited. We have a really, really great panel today. I'm going to slip to my next slide here. You're going to see their beautiful faces projected just briefly. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see everybody. Okay, cool. There we all are. Yeah, I think I've set the stage quite well. Yeah, just once again, if you have questions or need something, please just put it in the chat. My colleague Hannah will make sure we don't totally bulldoze over it or miss anything. I think an important place to start is, I mean, I'm always happy to introduce people. They've got some incredible backgrounds, but I kind of prefer to just throw it to all of you, probably starting with Kathy, to just tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. Hey, so I'm Kathy McClear, and I'm the state director for AARP Minnesota. We have roughly 620,000 members across the state. And what we do is we work to empower individuals to choose how they live as they age. And we do that through our advocacy work, our community engagement work, and we build stronger, more livable, age-friendly communities. I should also note that we are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. So happy to be here and talk about how workforce and generations impact older workers.
Fantastic. Sarah, can I toss it to you?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Reichling. I am a principal at Clifton Larson Allen CLA. We are an accounting firm, professional services firm, headquartered here in Minneapolis. Our Minneapolis location, I should say, is actually our largest office, largest location. I spend all of my time working with nonprofit organizations on the assurance and tax space. I've been with CLA for just shy of 18 or 19 years or so, somewhere in that neck of the woods. And as an accounting firm, we work with a lot of ranges of individuals. And I would say as of right now, we're a firm of about 9,000 people, and about 25% of those people would be considered kind of interns or associates. So those that are freshly out of college and or in that 1 to 2 to 3 year range from being removed from college. So there's a lot of individuals in that age range that we're looking to bring into our profession. So that's a focus area for us as a firm overall, but work with all different generations.
Fantastic. Courtney.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here today. My name is Courtney Lemers, and I'm our Senior Manager of Member Engagement for MRA, the Management Association. So what we do is we are a local nonprofit employer association. So we serve businesses across the upper Midwest, including Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Ohio, with all things talent, human resources. So we work with a lot of organizations on their talent management, learning and organizational development, as well as total rewards. So a lot of what I do is our conferences and events, roundtables, and then our next generation work. So everything from internships, emerging leaders, and everything in between, both internally at MRA as well with all of our member companies. So it's been a hot topic the last year, especially the last 6 months. So excited to be on this panel today and share a little bit about what we're seeing with companies and just what companies are doing to engage all generations in the workplace. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everybody. I think that kind of gives us a preview of what it is that you do, who you are, kind of like what sort of end of the spectrum are you going to be occupying. But just to kind of reiterate, this is a topic that I feel like over the past couple years has definitely kind of had this effervescent glow to it. It's kind of this evergreen piece. You'll see opinion pieces coming out, whether it's in like the BBC, the Star Tribune, kind of all over the place, and people sort of maybe a little stumped about how to have conversations about this. So we're excited that you're here and you're tuning in. Definitely something that we're seeing across all types of different industries, business sizes, like nobody's kind of like shielded from this. We're seeing in all areas, as well as across not just the Twin Cities, but definitely greater Minnesota as well. So excited to talk a little bit about this. Similar to kind of some of the work that Courtney does, the Chamber also has an emerging leaders program where we're trying to invest in, creating connections and opportunities for young people across industries to, just network and get to know one another. As well as some programming in our Leadership Twin Cities cohort, which is more of kind of that maybe 5 or 6 years out into their career and or kind of like middle of career. We have people from kind of all across the spectrum. But yeah, just giving them opportunities to continue to network, learn about the different issues in the Twin Cities community. Wanted to just mention that because if it's something that you're interested in, we actually opened applications on Monday for our next Leadership Twin Cities cohort. So would be happy to chat with you about that. But circling back in on navigating generations in the workplace, we wanted to start with a short presentation from Courtney, just to kind of level set. I think, people are coming with their own personal experiences or maybe having read some of those articles. So if we can just get some language around what it is that we're talking about, what generations are in the workplace, I think that we can go forth in this hour we have together with a little bit more, just kind of like knowledge base built. So I'm going to go ahead and get some slides pulled up, and Courtney, I'm going to let you take the mic.
Awesome. Thank you, Maddie. And Sarah, Kathy, please jump in at any point too. Just want to share a little bit and set the stage for our conversation here today. So let's start with getting the chat a little active. So we all know the different generations. We'll bring that up here in just a second here. But I want to see what, when you think about your generation and what has shaped you into who you are and your experiences, I want to see what experiences you would say were the most impactful for your generation. And I think, one of the ones that I automatically think of with my generation is, 9/11. I remember that clearly, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well. Just talking with different generations, there are so many different things that have shaped us, and we have those common experiences among generations. So if you can just take a second to put what that, life event or experience might be. Let's see if we can get the chat warmed up here. The recession, absolutely. Those are great ones. So I have done this presentation a couple of times. I want to spend most of the time doing Q&A at the end, but just want to set the stage with the generations that we have in the workplace. So taking a look here, you've probably seen most of them. Primarily our workforce are the baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and then Gen Z, and of course might have a few traditionals still in your workplace. So I always, start this presentation by saying there's a lot of stereotypes with generations. A lot of them are true. A lot of them may not be true depending on who you are as an individual. But I want to start by just recognizing that each person is so unique, and whether there might be commonalities within generations, it's so important to get to know people as an individual. And if you were on before we started, we were kind of having some brief conversation before. But sometimes stages of life are more important than the generation themselves. Um, my bio that was sent over to Maddie says I identify as a millennial. So I technically am a millennial based on the year that I was born, but also tend to relate more towards Gen Z solely because of maybe the stage of life that I'm in. Some of the millennials are in their 40s, late 30s, and might have a family, a home, different things like that. And while I am technically a millennial, I may relate to the stage of life of Gen Z a little bit more. So just taking a look here, I think it's just recognizing that each person has their own unique experiences, even though some of the, similarities might happen within generations. So, Maddie, if you want to jump to the next slide here, we'll bring up some of the stereotypes. So again, these are all, some stereotypes and skills, and you might be able to see that, you're like, "Oh, yes, I definitely, I'm tech savvy. I definitely relate with that. That's definitely true with my generation." But some of them might not. And I think, the one example that we use quite a bit is how long employees stay in the workplace. And when you think of maybe some of the older generations, staying at the same job really showed your loyalty. I look at, my parents have had a couple jobs in their careers. My grandparents, had one job throughout their career. And I have, a couple of friends that have already had 5 or 6 different jobs, and whether that's good or bad, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not loyal or they're not willing to work hard. It's just a different way of doing business, and I think when we look at career paths and what that looks like, um, Gen Z is able to gain new experiences and honestly, for some of them, it's a way to make more money by changing jobs. And so as you have different generations looking at resumes and doing some of that hiring, are you holding that against people? So it's not doesn't necessarily mean that they're loyal or disloyal, but it's just an example of how things have changed in the workplace. So Maddie, if you want to jump to the next slide, please. So this is a from the U.S. Census Bureau, so it's a couple years old here, but you can see the makeup of the workforce, and just looking crazy that next year is 2025 already, but looking at the makeup of the workplace, and over half of the workforce will be made up of millennials and Gen Z, and just I think that shows who you have in the workplace and how you're engaging and attracting talent and engaging teams across all different generations. So just like to show that one. And when we talk about different generations in the workplace, I think communication is always something that comes up. I think there's a lot of reasons that there's, challenges with communication, and it's not necessarily a generational thing, but communication is a challenge just with different time zones, different shifts people are working, different methods that people are using to communicate. I joke, but I have a coworker of mine that whenever we have a conversation and it's not necessarily a scheduled meeting, I get a voicemail, a Teams message, an email, a calendar invite, and a text message, all saying like, "Let's connect." And I think there are so many different ways that you can connect now that it just makes it a challenge of how do we internally communicate with each other. On top of it, we don't have time for it today, but there's also a lot of slang out there too, and different words mean different things to different people. If you have a few minutes later today, go take a look at, just search Gen Z slang or Gen Alpha slang and see what some of the words mean. We used the other day. We had a Gen Zer say bet, and everyone looked at that person like, "What do you mean bet?" And so I think there's just even different words that mean different things to different people. So Maddie, you can jump to the next slide, please. So again, we talk about different ways to communicate, and these are just some of the stereotypical ways that people prefer to communicate. And I would just go back to just understanding the individual as a whole. My generation, I would say we prefer a Teams message or text message or whatever it might be. But I would say me as a person, I'm a pretty people person. I like to meet with people. So sometimes I prefer in person. And, I think it's important to ask people how they prefer to communicate. I had someone come up to me and just say, "What's your preferred way of communication?" And I had never been asked that question before. And so it really just made me stop and think, what is my preferred way of communication? And maybe I like to meet in person, but this individual told me that she prefers email unless it's, of course, unless it involves a specific conversation that we need to have in person, but not to just assume that I like to meet in person or I'd prefer a text message like that. So again, just knowing your individuals and who's on your team and who you're communicating with is important. Next one. Thank you, Maddie. So this is just an example. I was talking with one of my colleagues who she was an intern for us a couple years ago. She now works for us full time since she's graduated. And she said her biggest challenge entering the workforce was just figuring out communication. She was like, I have a millennial manager who will send me gifts and she'll send me memes and emojis all day, every day. But she has people on her team that, just use periods or don't say good morning and but then she's working with customers. So she was like, I always start, super professional. I try to be myself, but I don't want to overstep. And it takes time to learn who you're communicating with and their communication style to understand that they're not necessarily mad at you. And I just use this example of one of my coworkers and I, he's a baby boomer, and we were in a meeting waiting for an external partner to join, and it just said, waiting for the host to start the meeting. And so he was just sending this message to let the host know that we were, ready, we're available whenever he was able to jump on. And when he typed this, I was like, oh my goodness, like, can you say good morning? We're going to make him think that that we're mad at him for not being there on time. And I was like, even a good morning or an exclamation mark or a smiley face, he might know that we're not mad. We're just here available. And that's just something we've had lots of conversations about, is just the ways that people, type email. And, email, you can't always tell the tone that's in a message. And there's jokes about how periods, you think your manager's mad at you or something like that. So just being able to have those conversations within your workplace and understand how people communicate is important. Next slide, Minnie. So then lastly, I think there's a lot of benefits to having cross-generational teams between diverse perspectives of, innovation, different ideas that you're able to share, and then just mentorship and being able to have, um, conversations to continuously improve. But there are, of course, challenges that go with it. And of course, we just talked about communication, but one other area I want to talk about a little bit here is feedback. I think, the traditionalists have said, no news is good news. I'm doing my job, to going to, baby boomers are used to a review once a year, maybe at the end of the year, how your job went. And I work with a group of interns for our member companies. And the number one thing we hear from them is they want feedback. They have no idea how they're doing. And we typically try to tell them, like, of course, have those conversations with your managers. That's very important. But they want continuous and very specific feedback. And when you talk with them, they grew up in a school environment where they would complete their tests online and they would get the score right back to them. They knew immediately how they did on that exam. And that's kind of shaped them into them entering the workforce and wanting that instant feedback. And it's not just, oh, you're doing a good job. It's what exactly did I do well on? So I think it's just a different expectation. And when you have managers that are saying, I don't want to tell them they're doing a good job for just doing their job, we expect them to do their job. There's just a little bit of a communication that needs to happen between, managers and maybe some of the younger generations about what they need to do their job better and what their expectations are. So that's something we just hear a lot, both sides of it, Gen Z employees asking for more continuous, instant, immediate feedback and specific, and maybe some of the older generation saying, well, we expect you to do your job. You're not getting feedback every single time you do what we're asking you to do. So just a few examples to share. I know we're going to talk, we have some questions lined up, but of course want your questions in the chat that we can answer. But just wanted to set the stage for today. So that's all I have. I don't know, Sarah or Kathy, if you have anything to add to what I just shared.
Hey, I'll jump in. Yeah, and I appreciate what you said about, stereotypes are stereotypes, right? And it's not universal. So when you talk about traditionals or boomers or even Gen Xers, we're not a monolith and we're not all exactly the same. And just pointing out that, as people are living longer, they are putting off retirement and staying in the workforce longer, sometimes out of preference, sometimes out of necessity. But it's also important to make sure that any of those negative stereotypes and outdated assumptions, that we put those aside so that we are treating workers of all generations fairly. I know early in my career, in a different career, being younger was not an advantage. I was in a career that I needed a little bit of experience under my belt. And so, age discrimination can happen certainly at either end of the spectrum, but just making sure that, some of those older workers are being treated fairly and that they have a lot of the same desires and motivations as younger workers.
I've given this presentation a couple times, and even when we're talking about some of the younger generations, people of all generations are like, no, even if you're talking about Gen Z, I want the same things that they want. And it's going through, just because it's a stereotype of a younger generation doesn't mean that not everybody wants flexibility in the workplace and different things like that. So it's a very good point, Kathy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I found that last slide to just be so helpful in terms of, we probably all have examples from our own working life of I was saying one thing and they heard something else, or I got an email and maybe felt differently than how they had intended for that message to come across. But really kind of zoning in when we think from a workforce perspective. And I think that's definitely why we chose this topic for this series is how can we utilize specifically that last slide around feedback and consistency and even just kind of planning, maybe if you're supervising someone to just say, I actually attended this webinar the other week and I was seeing kind of this chart. Can you pick out on this chart where you sort of identify? It might not be with your generation. I'd love to know that. I'd love to set up more, often check-ins with you, and maybe we can develop sort of a style that works of note-taking and things like that. And just really feeling that, we're using it as perspective and as something to consider, but not sort of something that's really set in stone and wanting to box people in. So, Sarah, I know I kind of jumped in. Didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
No, I think that's actually a great kind of segue point to something else that actually kind of dinged is I think that is actually kind of the key piece in all of this. It's the ability to adapt and change, because even individuals throughout a career are going to change how some of these things, how communications happen. Technology is changing every single day. So the way we communicate today is not going to probably be the same in 10 years. And so I think the ability to adapt and in a job like the one I'm in a career profession like this, where we're working with so many different people, I think the key thing is exactly what you said, Maddie, in terms of just understanding who you're working with and trying to, if you're in a supervisory role, understanding how best they want to receive that feedback and that communication. And we do our best to employ all of our people who are in a coaching type position to, feel empowered to ask those questions and know how to deliver coaching in that regard. And I think that's the key piece in my mind, is just the ability to pivot, kind of have an arsenal of ways that you can communicate with different types of people. In this profession too, we're working with clients every single day. And so not only our own internal teams, but our external facing clients are going to be across the spectrum in terms of those types of individuals that we might be working with. So again, the communication styles and things, just having the ability to kind of jump from different ways fairly seamlessly, I think is a key to success, I would say, across probably any profession.
Absolutely. And we have our first question in the chat. Yay. Thanks, Lori. So the question is there a way to incorporate some bias awareness that we all carry as a part of building generational workplace appreciation? I think we touched on that a little bit, but I don't know if there are any other folks on the panel that are feeling like they have something that they want to add.
I can share just a couple of things. So AERP's CEO a few years ago wrote a book called Disrupt Aging, which is really about kind of shaking up some of those stereotypes. But as part of the Minnesota Leadership Coalition on Aging, they have been holding recently some Reframe Aging webinars. And so sometimes it's even just how, what your nomenclature is. How do you talk about aging? Is it, and certainly in some cultures, using the term elder is a term of respect. But in other cultures, being called an elder maybe isn't appreciated as much, or being called a senior or a senior citizen. And so thinking about, whether it's, okay, boomer, maybe that's not an appropriate thing to bring out in the workplace, but understanding how to talk about the different generations and recognizing that, it maybe isn't, pre-retirees or senior workers. It's older workers or people of a different generation. And so just recognizing, I think, how you speak about aging is one way to just address potential for bias, certainly.
I would just, agreeing with what you say, Kathy. I think part of it's just the education and having an environment to talk about some of that. I mean, we've gone in and talked with companies, and we've also brought in external speakers for our own organization to, one, just present and share this information with our employees, and then have a space where we can have that conversation of, when I experienced this, this is how I felt. And, I think a lot of times people don't even necessarily realize that that's how they're talking about it, or that it's, offending somebody. So it's just part of that's that education piece and having a place where they can have that conversation.
Yeah, and I think that it fits naturally too with everyone's either both personal and professional journey as it relates to DEIB efforts, so diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging efforts. And so the inclusion piece, I think, is the key piece in this maybe specific conversation. And so I think everyone's at a different place in that journey, again, both professionally as well as personally. And so I feel that, just having that mindset is, yes, there's going to be bias in all of those types of things. And I think just being cognizant of that, they're there, but always looking for, I like to live with the positive mindset of there's always something positive to be found in something. So you're looking for that in a situation, in a potential conflict or resolution, and even in different individuals. Everyone's bringing something to the table in terms of what they can provide and offer as a benefit to you and to the organization. So I think just having that as a cognizant mindset, given that as you're on some phase of that journey, I think is also valuable.
Absolutely. Well, fantastic. And thanks for the questions, folks. Just keep them coming. We're happy to kind of just be flexible. I've got a handful here, and my brain is just totally going all over the place. I guess sort of a sensical place to start when we're looking, especially at the couple different slides that listed the generations and what times they started and where they kind of end. And yeah, Courtney, you've hinted to like the zillennial phenomenon. Funny enough, our president and CEO here at the chamber is right on the cusp of millennial and Gen Xer, and him and I have gotten lunch a couple times and talked about what is that like for him and what has that been like for him at different points in his career. And yeah, just sort of even the position that maybe that person might find themselves in within an organization might really align with what specific generation they're a part of and where they're supposed to be in the workforce. I know something that we've also talked a lot about, or I've seen talked a lot about, is like the idea of a lost generation. But the question I have, I guess, is just, are there any generations that we feel like we missed, or any other pieces about any specific generations in particular that we feel like we kind of want to highlight here?
I mean, I can start. I don't know that there's any generations we missed. I mean, I think the key thing too here is what we've already kind of hit on, is that it's fluid. And so while yes, by birth date, we all reside in one, on those slides, as Courtney was going through them, I could point to, well, that metric there was more me under that generation. And then this metric here under this generation is more me and whatever. So I feel like while we talked about the stereotypes and those do exist, I feel like it's a tag because of your birth year, but I think that a lot of things are probably a bit more fluid and flexible. So I think in my mind, that's the key piece more so than it is forgetting a generation. Yes, we might be forgetting a generation by birth year. They might be bifurcated even in those larger ones, even further apart. But I think that's in my mind, when I think of what did we miss, it's just more that slide, those slides are great and they're very, very true, but a lot of people are probably a piece of each of those.
Yeah, Sarah, I would agree. And I think too, depending on where you fall in your particular generation, how you were influenced, right? I mean, I'm solidly a Gen Xer, but I was very much influenced by my grandparents and their work ethic, and they lived in the Depression. And, my dad, who, is I'm not even sure if he's a boomer. I think he's pre-boomer. So, certainly who you are influenced by can certainly determine. And there are probably some, geographic differences as well. I mean, I certainly think that in the Midwest, we all have a very strong work ethic. You get out to the coast and maybe that's not the case, but maybe it is the case. But certainly who you were influenced by, no matter where you fall in this generation. So I identified with a lot of the descriptors across the board too.
Awesome. Well, I think the makeup of the panel, I mean, it was so hard to pick. There were so many great people that we wanted to feature, and just appreciate each of your time just kind of thinking through some of these different pieces. I'd love to hear a little bit more from whoever wants to hop in first about like maybe some of the specific supports that you're providing. I guess, Sarah, it's sort of the work at CLA comes to mind because when I was looking at that last slide and seeing kind of some of the needs on the younger generations of really wanting that more consistent feedback, if there's any like specific programs that you wanted to highlight or just maybe some like success stories that you have of just like really seeing people get their needs met and being able to grow and then kind of give back as more folks then join CLA.
Yeah, I think I can say pretty confidently that we all could probably do better at giving feedback more timely. And so one of the things at CLA that we try to do to help push that forward is we rely on some of our younger generations. We have a young advisory council within our office, and they're a younger group of individuals, and that's what they consistently hear. And currently within CLA, one of the things we're doing is a feedback tag challenge of just how long of a train can we make of giving feedback. And so there's different things that we put into place that can seem more quote unquote fun and something that's new and different versus just the same kind of rudimentary, here's the standard feedback form we typically use and things like that. We also empower our younger individuals to choose their career coach. So that way it's something that's not just assigned to you as your staff A who started, you get this coach and so on and so forth. But that as a young individual just starting your career, trying to model choosing your career coach based on where you maybe want to model your career trajectory, your career growth, or just to get different insights and opportunities. I live and breathe the nonprofit space, but there's nothing to stop anyone, myself or anyone I work with, to say I'd like to get some career feedback from someone who potentially works in a banking industry, for example. So that's another way in which we at least give the power of that relationship and kind of choosing who best could maybe suit your feedback needs to the younger individual just directly even out of college and out of school versus waiting 10 years down the road and now you get to choose a career coach. So it's something that's really kind of handed to you at the onset. And even outside of that, there's a lot of different things within our kind of different teams that we try to do to enforce that, but those are a few that initially kind of come to mind.
That's fantastic. And Kathy, yeah, why don't you come in?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot of ways that employers can support workers of all ages. And, some of that's through ensuring that there is training available to help all employees, whether it's bridging their skills gap, promoting upskilling, maybe it's reskilling, understanding that people learn in a variety of ways, right? So adult learners learn differently than children learn, and making sure that when you have those trainings that you have them in a variety of ways to meet the needs of the adult learner. Even things like job swapping or temporary assignments can really help workers grow in their career of any age. We have a national office in Washington, D.C., and no matter what the age is, we have a lot of complaints that, oh gosh, they don't really understand what it's like to work in the state office. And so we've always thought it would be super valuable to have folks in the national office come work in our local office to really understand what the boots on the ground experience is like. We know that more experienced workers can really be a great resource to help some of those younger, less experienced workers develop some of those soft skills like leadership or communication, critical thinking, some of those things that are really developed over an entire lifetime of career and life experience. So sometimes buddy systems or mentoring programs love the coaching that Sarah talked about, that can pair younger workers with older employees so that they can work together and solve some problems, really can be beneficial to both parties. And in fact, there's some AARP research that shows that It shows that intergenerational teams make better business decisions than non-age diverse teams. And so really getting that that well-rounded perspective can really be a beneficial business asset.
That is a fantastic segue. I want to ask one of the questions that's in the Q&A, but Courtney, do you want to add anything before we do?
I was just going to add one kind of success story that we've seen. And Kathy, I love that you mentioned the mentor program, because that was something on my list as well. We had one company that developed a partnership agreement, and you know, I wouldn't say it's necessarily generational, but it did help with some of the generational challenges that they had. But it was literally a one-page form with probably 5 questions on it, but it just asked some of those questions for them to have the basic knowledge of what the makeup of this team was. And so they did it both for their departments as well as like cross-functional teams across the business, where, hey, maybe I'm meeting Maddie for the first time and I've never met her before, but I know, Maddie's a morning person and she works from 7 to 3 and those are her working hours. But then it asks questions like communication preferences, like some of that personal lifestyle thing, like, oh, I have to pick up a kid at 3 o'clock, so I can't meet between this time. And then it also talked about feedback. So how do you prefer to receive feedback, and just different things like that. So I think it's pretty cool that they have a formal partnership agreement that you can have those conversations up front. So you're on, the same page and you can understand that right away.
That's fantastic. That seems like just such a helpful tool. And did you say you guys were using that internally and externally, or?
It was one of our member companies that were using
Okay.
it internally for their team. They have about 800 employees across different locations. So they do
Sure.
have some cross-functional teams. To your point, Kathy, they are very intentional about finding different people from different departments, different demographics for that, efficiency and innovation that comes with it.
That's great. Well, one of the questions in the chat that I feel like ties to the last couple comments that people have been making is, I'm going to say that we're answering it live so everybody could see it. So one-to-one relationships are fairly easy to honor individual preferences. However, what tips do you have to help teams function well when everyone has different preferences? For example, if a manager wants everyone to communicate via Teams, but a few members of the team prefer email or vice versa, if anybody has tips on how to balance efficiency and preferences. I mean, I think Courtney, I think the forum sounds like a really great way. Does anybody else have like experiences or other suggestions as to how they kind of maybe even convert some people to using a platform that they're not as comfortable with? Or is there a totally different approach that you've taken with maybe a similar situation?
Well, I don't know if this is any advice, maybe more of a challenge, but one of the things that I struggle with is, because we have more ways to communicate, there's more ways to communicate, and it's can sometimes be a challenge. We get a ton of emails, as I'm sure most everyone does, but being a nationwide organization, that we have a lot of incoming, both from internal and external. And so I've tried to establish some norms where, okay, let's use Teams as more of the instant messaging, quick communication. If you have just a quick question, let's try as much as we can as a small team, keep some of those conversations out of email. And let email be for the longer, more in depth, or when we're trying to communicate with people outside of just our little team. But I do find myself duplicating some of my communications, because I'll put something in Teams like, oh, the weather's supposed to be bad tomorrow. Feel free to work from home if you want to. But I'm always afraid that somebody might miss it if they didn't look at Teams or they didn't get the notification. I don't want somebody to show up at the office if they don't have to. And so I do find myself making sure that I put something in email as well, just to make sure I've covered my bases. But yeah, it is a challenge. And I think just the more bifurcated all of our communications become, it is kind of a challenge. And you do have to set those sort of office norms or team norms to understand, if someone's not going to ever check their Teams messages, that's not going to be an effective way to communicate. And so really having to kind of communicate up front how you want to communicate and how you want to use those specific channels, I think is really important.
Absolutely.
And I'd maybe just add too that I don't know that's a great question, because I don't know that it'll ever be solved. Like we think of just, as that question was being read, I'm just picturing, a college a college group class that requires you to get in a group of 4 or 5 people, and somehow it feels like 2 do the work and 3 maybe not. So I think that there's always that. And so I think just navigating that is setting the expectations at the front, kind of like Kathy said, and either setting norms for the channel, the ways in which we can communicate, setting, here's where is kind of the harder barriers for certain people to cross, and trying to find a common median for everyone to just say, okay, well then here's kind of what we can agree on as a group, that these are going to be the norms of this group at this moment in time, and kind of setting that at the onset, I think can help. But I'm guessing in perpetuity, that might be a question that never totally gets fully answered with a great, here's the one way to do this type response.
Right.
Agreed. I don't have much to add. The only thing I'll say is maybe just understanding why they might not be using some of those channels. I think I look at us internally, and we've recently switched over to Teams, but it's new for us, and some of it's just the education. People don't feel comfortable in it. So what, webinars and what tools do we have to help people feel comfortable utilizing the tools that you do have?
Right. Yeah, I definitely think some of the kind of key pieces that I'm parsing through across the conversation we've had so far is just really being about as direct and as empowered as possible to ask people questions about preferences, and not in a an accusatory or a degrading way, but just in a really trying to meet people where they're at and make them feel comfortable, as well as meet objectives as a team. And I think it kind of has to be an evolving conversation. It's probably not just a one and done situation. Needs and preferences will change over time. So just kind of trying to bring that back up and say, look, it looks like these Zoom meetings have been going really well over the last couple of weeks. Does anybody think that there's something we could be doing that's different or better? And kind of, utilizing sort of that like hive mindset to see if there is anything that is kind of bubbling up for people that they want to address. But we've got a couple other questions, so I'm just going to keep going with them, which is maybe a little bit more of an individual situation, but I think it's something that a lot of people are thinking about. So thanks for the question, Monica, which is, from your experience as we think about Gen Z wanting / being more flexible, what if the position does not lend itself to a lot of flexibility, for example, starting times? I would love to hear if anybody has thoughts about that. A non-flexible hours position.
Yeah, I think everything's continued to evolve in the last 4 years. So I think maybe the former concept of a true, maybe non-flexible type position probably has a little bit more to it than it maybe ever would have without maybe some of the changes that we've had over the last 4 years. I guess I would say individuals who are entering the workforce and looking for that flexibility, there probably are going to be a handful of jobs that maybe just don't lend themselves well to that. That doesn't mean that to the extent that that type of job hasn't tried to maybe shift things around a little bit, but I would say that I would tend to think, and thinking just through things at CLA and all the different types of positions we have, even if there's a certain start time at a particular day or week, there probably is the equivalent of a different week where maybe there can be some flexibility to have a little bit different of a start time. So I think that there's probably a bit more flexibility in this day and age than there maybe would have been had this webinar taken place without maybe a pandemic in the middle of it. But I do think that there probably might still be some. I can't probably speak to any specifically that I directly relate to on a day-to-day basis, but I'm sure there's some that maybe just are on that spectrum of less flexible versus compared to those that are probably moved more towards the middle or fully flexible on the other end.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think it also goes back to understanding what motivates an employee, right? I mean, if that's something that's super important to them, how can you accommodate? Is it, yes, I'll work at 7 o'clock in the morning, but I would like to work from home. If that's feasible, try to find ways to look for those solutions. But I think workplace flexibility is really important, no matter the generation, right? So if you are just starting a family and you need to go pick up your sick child from school, that's some flexibility that younger workers would really appreciate. But likewise, on the other end of the spectrum, having some caregiving policies where so for example, I'm helping my mom take care of my dad, and there are times when I need to take care of both of them. And so I'm really grateful that my organization has caregiving leave, which is separate from my paid time off. It's separate from my sick time. It's a whole separate pool of leave that I am allowed to go take care of a loved one. And so we do know that about 73% of workers are caring for a loved one, whether it's a child, whether it's a spouse, a sick spouse, whether it's an adult child with disabilities, whether it's caring for an aging parent. And so having some workplace policies that afford that flexibility to either flex your hours or use a specific pool of time to take off to take care of those caregiving needs. We know that supporting people in the workplace to have that flexibility for those types of things, it really is a point of being able to retain good talent and to be able to support those workers in the workplace.
Agreed with all of that. We've seen even some manufacturing organizations that have had, very dedicated shifts, even find flexibility in some of their shifts. There's one in northern Wisconsin that I'm thinking of that, in talking with their employees, they found, that just generally speaking, the demographic that they had on their line wanted long weekends to go hunting. And so they were able to change some of those shifts to Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So they were able to have long weekends every other weekend. So I think, to your point, Sarah, with a pandemic in the middle, companies, even manufacturing, have gotten really creative with shifts, just depending on, the motivation, the why behind wanting some of that flexibility.
Absolutely. And I think probably the common thread that we saw, um, specifically on that last slide, or the one where we're able to see kind of all the generations across, is just understanding purpose and the why. I think, for younger generations is just continuing to be, you know, something that they're going to continue to bring up and want to, speak truth to in their teams. And so being able to say, if there is a position in particular that is just not conducive to maybe the level of flexibility that they're looking for, just being honest about that and saying, this is a position where we need somebody who can be on call and, maybe in a physical office, maybe in a specific place where like there's mail and there's telephones and other things like that. And saying like, on those days where we maybe aren't going to get mail, you don't have to come in, or other things like that. Just really trying to listen to the needs of the worker. But it's okay to say that there are, existing needs, and that just might not be the best fit for everybody. But yeah, love the idea of working with them and just hearing from them in a more casual way. So let's see. Just a couple more pieces coming in, so I'm trying to keep an eye on that. Well, one other piece, I'm glad that we talked about caregivers, because I know that was, sort of these hidden roles that people across the generational spectrum have that we might not have a lot of policy around. But I think some of the other needs that are kind of coming forth through the slides that were shared in our conversation is just like benefits, like what are people interested in? And like we said, I think there's a lot of interest in a level of flexibility across the board. But Deborah brought up a question in the Q&A, and I'll say that we're going to answer it live so you can see it, about the upcoming paid family and medical leave program that's going to be launching in 2026, as well as maybe like fringe benefits that like specific generations maybe on your teams are looking for. And I guess, Courtney, I'm sort of looking at MRA as I know you guys have your finger on the pulse of this, but would love to hear your thoughts if you have any thoughts specifically about paid family and medical leave or other benefits that people are really interested in.
Yeah, happy to start with this one. Just generally with benefits, we always say it's not a benefit unless I think it's a benefit. And something we've especially seen over the last, couple of years, younger generations are staying on their parents' healthcare, and even if they're paying their parents for their healthcare, um, healthcare isn't necessarily a benefit for those under the age of 26. So, what other benefits may you be able to offer for all generations too, of course? Like I said, if it's not a benefit unless I think it's a benefit. But like we've talked about before, I think a lot of people, no matter what your generation is looking for time, workplace flexibility. It's silly to say, but people always like food in the workplace. We've even seen some creative offerings with being able to offer someone to come clean your home and it costs the company $100 a month. So there are definitely some creative offerings out there we've seen. We've also seen some companies look at like an a la carte package for benefits where employees can select which ones they want. Easier said than done, but it is something that's being talked about in the HR world. So those are some of the examples I would just call out here.
I'm happy to jump in too. AARP did support the Paid Family Medical Leave Act that did pass. It's one of the most progressive in the country, and we're really proud that Minnesota has adopted that, and it will come into play. Again, because we have so many caregivers in the workforce, it will allow up to 12 weeks consecutive to care for yourself or a family member, and we have a very broad definition of family. And so it's not just a blood relative, but it can be chosen family. So for example, at one point in time, my dad used to, take their next door neighbor to doctor's appointments and pick up groceries for them. He was essentially serving as a caregiver for that individual who didn't have family living in town. And so, under Minnesota's definition, that could be, if you have that affinity relationship, that could be considered caregiving and would qualify as being able to take time for that leave. It has very progressive wage replacement. So low income workers who, have not had access to leave programs in the past, it provides up to 90% wage replacement for someone who is in a low income position. And so we really do think this will help level the playing field for all to be able to take care of themselves and their families going forward. Another piece, another benefit that no one's really mentioned is retirement savings. And so there are, many companies do offer retirement plans or 401k plans through work. Secure Choice is another measure that passed last year, which will require any employer that has 5 or more employees, they will be required to offer a public-private plan through a simple payroll deduction. So the employer doesn't have to pay anything. The employee can opt out, but I do believe it's an auto enrollment. We know that people are 20 times more likely to save for retirement if they have a plan at work. We also know that about 700,000 employees across Minnesota do not have access to a retirement plan at work, and those of color are least likely to have access to that retirement plan. So we think that Secure Choice really is going to be a game changer for giving people an opportunity to save for the future through their workplace retirement plans. It should be just a plug and play plan that employers can offer. And really should make a difference, again, with recruiting and retaining employees who are looking for some sort of way to save for retirement. And then certainly, like on the end of, I've talked about caregiving leave and being flexible for that, but on the other end of the spectrum, as folks are nearing that time when they're thinking about retirement, offering, phased retirement plans or some job share opportunities. It might be a great opportunity for someone who isn't quite ready to retire. They want to go down to 50% time. And maybe you have a new mom who wants to stay in the workforce, but doesn't want to be a full-time working parent. Maybe there's a way to pair those two to do some sort of a job share situation so that at both ends of the spectrum, those employees are really benefiting from that flexibility.
That's a great example. I've never come across a company that's doing the share model, but I think that totally makes sense. And Sarah, were you going to say anything?
I was just going to add that I think as we've continued to, that slide that Courtney had showing that a younger generation is becoming a bigger and bigger piece of the workforce, that we've all just had to adapt and add a variety of different benefits, whether they're actual benefit offerings that you elect into or out of, or they're just some of the smaller things like Courtney said, of just having food in the office, taking people out to coffee, some of these, just more routine things that we're all already doing on a daily basis, and just bringing more people along into them. And so I think that that's something we've actively tried to do at CLA. I think we've got like 20 to 30 different types of actual benefits, people for them to enroll in or out of. So I think that it'll just continue to evolve as the younger generation becomes a bigger and bigger piece. And then the generation after that, it'll continue to evolve as a newer one enters the workforce too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was having a conversation yesterday. We run skills-based hiring workshops, and we were talking a lot about what sort of language and job descriptions or like scheduling? Are you communicating on a job description that would maybe cause people to opt in or opt out? And specifically kind of talking about some fun and interesting benefits. But yeah, Gen Alpha, we don't know them as adults. They're the generation that will follow Gen Z, and we're going to have a lot to learn from them. They are, some of them are called screenagers. They will never know a time before the internet and specifically, handheld devices. So it really fascinating kind of people starting to think about what it's going to look like to have them in the workplace and just the assets that they're going to bring and some of the maybe deficits of, from their upbringing with screens. But thought I'd just throw that in as kind of like a preview of what's to come. And thanks, Deb, for the question about paid family and medical leave. And there's so much to dive into on that. We're really excited to see that coming in 2026, and it is going to be our workforce webinar topic. We're hoping in June, but hope sometime over the summer. So I just kind of put that out there. If it's something that piqued your interest and you're like, whoa, I need to know more about that, we're going to have some more information coming. But hopefully today's conversation was enlightening for you in some way, and maybe you're going back being like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we had this benefit? Or I've never heard of this share model with a specific position, or we didn't even get to really touch on the internship model. I think, Kathy, that you had mentioned to me about the returnships instead of internships. So Google that if you have a couple minutes after the webinar. But just want to thank everybody for their time and our amazing panelists. And we hope to see you at our workforce webinar next month. Some information should be coming out about that in the next couple weeks. But I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, friends.